righty, Mitch. It's that time of the show. We got to hear from you.
Oh, boy.
Top 5 list of the week. Let's go.
Well, Dallin, we've been doing our quarterbacks by era series, and we're going to stick right with it. I couldn't come up with any cool sayings that the 90s had. So let's just get right into it, man. Let's get right into Mitch-Mo's top 5 list of the week. Because we're going to get into quarterbacks of the 1990s. The era of grunge bands. The era of Nickelodeon cartoons. The era of, I don't know, what do you remember from the 90s, Dallin? What are your favorite 90s?
I remember childhood. I remember the push ice cream pops, the push pops.
Oh, the push
pops. Gushers.
Flintstone vitamins.
All that on Nickelodeon, all the good stuff. Wu-Tang Clan, Enter the 36 Chambers by Wu-Tang Clan, greatest hip-hop album of all time. Remember that vividly.
Eminem start.
Exactly.
Becoming in the 90s. TLC. The Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. I mean, come on. So many good things about the 90s. But, Dallin, we're going to talk about a specific good thing about the 90s. That was quarterbacks. And I'll tell you what. Of all the lists, this one I labored the most over because I had a hard time picking these ones. The honorable mentions are pretty simple, right? Drew Bledsoe, Randall Cunningham, Warren Moon, Dan Marino, Mark Brunell. All great quarterbacks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Dan Marino might be the little bit of a shock that's on the honorable mention because he's Dan Marino, but like the majority, his good production years came in the 80s, right? They didn't come in the 90s. When it comes to the top 5, Dallin, you can make an argument for any of the top 3 being number 1. You can make an argument for number 4 being in the top 3, and you can make an argument of number 5 being number 4. So, like, there is just plenty of variety that comes with this list. I'm a little scared to give it, but I welcome the online hate. Just let me know where I'm wrong. We say every week, tell us we suck. That's how we can get better. Tell me I suck. And I'll work on getting better. Dallin, let's get started with number 5 on the list. Number 5, I'm going Jim Kelly. Jim Kelly going to be number 5 on the list. A 73-30 record as a quarterback in the 90s. 156 touchdowns, 112 interceptions. 3-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro. 4 straight Super Bowl appearances without a Super Bowl victory. And that's probably what puts him down at number 5 and what puts him in the top 5, right? You have to get to the Super Bowl. Getting to the Super Bowl is an accomplishment in itself, right? But losing 4 straight Super Bowls definitely hurts you in the long run. So it's what puts him there, but it's also what keeps him down at the bottom part of the top 5. Ran that K-gun offense under Marv Levy, and it was just a great fit for what Jim Kelly did best. We saw him do it in the USFL with the Houston Gamblers. He did it best in Buffalo, and he's going to be number 5 on the list.
Yeah, that's a great pick. It's a crazy list when a guy who went to 4 straight Pro Bowls is number 5. So, the 90s
Super Bowls.
4 straight Super Bowls. I mean, excuse me. Yeah. 4 straight Super Bowls, and is the 5th, the final entry on the list. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough list to get into. And number 4 on the list, Dallin, we're going to go with a guy who I think you probably would have had higher up had you been making this one. I'm going Steve Young.
Yeah.
I'm going Steve Young at number 4.
Disrespect. I'm just kidding.
I mean, it is. I mean, it feels disrespectful, right? Because his efficiency numbers were so good.
Yeah.
Right? 84-31 record, 200 touchdowns to only 80 interceptions, completed just over 66% of his passes, quarterback rating over 101. Also ran for 33 rushing touchdowns. The guy was a 2-time MVP, a 1-time Offensive Player of the Year, a Super Bowl champion, a Super Bowl MVP, 7-time Pro Bowler. It feels wrong to put him down this low. But compared to the other guys and the MVPs and the Super Bowls, it just doesn't quite compare. I think that's steep. Then this is the guy I said you could definitely make an argument for him being in that top 3 or even the top 2 quarterbacks of the 90s. But Steve Young on this list is going to fall number 4 on the list.
Fair enough. It is Mitch-Mo's top 5 list of the week, so we cannot complain. We just have to accept it.
I'm curious to know where you would put him after you know the other three, which
Yeah.
I think you have an idea of what the
I'll
other
let
three
you.
are going to be. But number 3 on the list, I'm going Troy Aikman, a 3-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, a 6-time Pro Bowler, 90-53 record, 149 touchdowns, 109 interceptions, completed just over 62% of his passes. Look, the guy's got the winning credentials. He was carried by a great rushing attack and great defenses. And so I not carried, that makes it sound bad, but the numbers and the gaudy numbers that other guys on this list have put up just aren't there for Troy Aikman because they had a completely different attack on offense. But probably one of the best game managers in NFL history was Troy Aikman. He did a fantastic job at staying efficient and controlling the game when the game needed to be controlled. Troy Aikman going to be number 3 on the list for quarterbacks in the 90s.
Yeah, fair enough. He was a winner. That'll get you up there. That'll certainly get you up there.
Right. Number 2 on the list, going with Brett Favre. Brett Favre, number 2 on the list. 82-43 record as a quarterback, 235 touchdowns to 141 touchdowns, completed over 141 interceptions, excuse me. Completed over 61% of his passes, over almost 31,000 yards passing in the 90s. A 3-time MVP, 3 in a row from 95 through 97. A 1-time Offensive Player of the Year, won a Super Bowl in 96, a 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. The guy's got the MVPs. The guy's got the accolades. I know he doesn't have the Super Bowls that Aikman has, but darn it, he was also more box office than Aikman was. Everyone wanted to watch Brett Favre play. If you get the choice between watching Troy Aikman play and Brett Favre play, you're picking Brett Favre 10 out of 10 times. 100 out of 100 times. You're picking Brett Favre because he was so dynamic. He was a gunslinger, right? He was so dynamic and different from with what he did. You're picking Brett Favre to watch every day of the week. That's why he's number 2 on the list.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, 3 straight MVPs, and you can't get number 1 on the list, though. It's got to be a pretty good name up top.
I got to give the nod. I got to give the nod to John Elway, right? And I mentioned it last week with the 80s where, you know what, he was great in the 80s, but his success came in the 90s. It came at the end of his career, a back-to-back Super Bowl champion in 97 and 98. 84-49 record as a quarterback, 180 touchdowns, 112 interceptions. The guy also was a very underrated rusher. Almost over 1,700 rushing yards and 22 rushing touchdowns in the 90s. 2-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 6-time Pro Bowler, a Walter Payton Man of the Year. I think the guy just completely encompassed what a 90s quarterback was supposed to look like. The other guys were kind of anomalies and they looked a little bit different. John Elway kind of was the prototype for the 90s quarterback and did it in winning fashion. So I give him the top spot here for quarterbacks of the 90s.
Fair enough. Hey, there's a lot of good names up there, as you guys just heard, because Mitch rattled off 5 incredible names in the top 5 quarterbacks of the 90s. Let's hear them one more time in order for the folks.
So number 5 on the list, Jim Kelly. Number 4, Steve Young. Number 3, Troy Aikman. Number 2, Brett Favre. And number 1, John Elway.
It's a great list, my friend. It's a great list. I will say, you asked how I'd feel about Steve Young at the end of the list. I definitely would have put him above Aikman. I probably would have felt really good with him at 3. And I would have even maybe put Favre at 1. I think I love that you gave it to Elway, and Favre is going to have more of the numbers. He has the 3 MVPs and all that, but I totally understand where you're saying Elway meant more to the decade maybe than Favre did. And I think that's a fair argument to make. And you certainly made a good case for that. So I love the list. It's a great list as always. It's never wrong because it's Mitch-Mo's and he does it right.
I'm sure I've had some wrong. I'm sure I've had some wrong ones. I'm sure. And I've heard about it on the TikTok, by the way, too, how wrong I am. No, it's Young over Aikman was one of the considerations I had, and then Favre over Elway. So you absolutely nailed the things that were eating at me while I was trying to make this list. So you're 100%
well, I think
correct.
you did great. I think you
Oh,
did
well,
great.
thank you.
That's a
Yeah.
tough one. It's is it going to get any easier in the 2000s for you next time we come around, though? Because I know you were not looking forward to the 90s. The 90s is certainly one of those decades. The 2000s will have some names, but maybe it's a little more like cut and dry. Do you think?
It's a little bit more clear cut, I think. It's a little bit more clear cut.
Mm.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
We shall see. I
There
don't
are
know.
some Super Bowl winners that probably aren't going to make the list because we've had some weird Super Bowl winning quarterbacks in the 2000s. So
Facts. Dilfer, Gannon. I mean, come on.
Brad Johnson.
Brad Johnson. Oh, yeah, that's right. Not Gannon, Brad Johnson. You're right. Yeah,
Gannon got his ass kicked in the Super Bowl. Is what happened.
He did.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, that'll be. We'll look forward to that. The top 5, Mitch-Mo's top 5 list of the week. The best, as always. Best 90s quarterbacks of all time. The definitive list on it here on the Sports Hour podcast. Mitch,